Hello everyone, I'm Orc and I make minis in HeroForge. This week's mini that we are looking at is Nurgle from Warhammer. I feel very conflicted about this mini. It's a mini that I decided to rework at the last minute. I just kind of felt like I could do like a bit of a better job. So today we're gonna be kind of looking at two versions of a mini. On the left side, here we have the old Nurgle. On the right side, we have the new version of the Nurgle. So why did I decide to change up the old Nurgle? I just felt like a lot of his like features that I added to his model, like these three things, they are actually like spider eyes. He's got also eyebrows. I was like, I don't know. And then he's got also like these broken horns here. If we like turn this around to here. So you can see like three broken horns, and then you have like a sort of like a crystal formation there going on, which is kind of supposed to represent a word stone. But when I was like thinking like, would Nurgle like put a word stone inside of his brain? I'm not so sure about it, to be honest. I don't really know enough about the Warhammer lore. If Nurgle would consider putting word stone inside of his brain, but I assume no. I assume he would probably just give it to somebody else. And another thing that I thought of were kind of like the horns that we have here. So the horns, they kind of look a little bit thorny, and I felt like that kind of looked more like a nature theme. And the Nurgle is very often just depicted with like these big antlers or like irregular horns or stuff. And the horns that I kind of had like on the old one, they are quite regular, as you can see. So let me know which version you kind of prefer, if the new version is better, or if you think the left version is better. I kind of feel like the new version is a little bit better. A little bit. They each have their own like smile. You know, this one has like a and this one has like a I don't know. The other reason why I felt a little bit conflicted about this Nurgle was I was just kind of comparing it to the online art that people did of Nurgle, and I felt like my Nurgle was a little bit ugly, I guess, but you know, being ugly and being Nurgle is kind of also the point, so that's why I just mostly felt very conflicted about like this overall, you know. But actually looking at it now, I kind of feel a little bit more confident. And what I did was probably the right decision. So let me know what you think. And yeah, let's kind of talk a little bit more about how we even did Nurgle and stuff. So in this section, I was just kind of mostly checking how much I could like push the body size, because when I went to work on Nurgle, I wanted to make it as kind of as wide as possible and maybe make it look as grotesque as possible, ideally without any neck, but I don't think I really managed to get anything without any neck. Here I started working on the face. This is where I started kind of exploring the tentacles and stuff. Well, not really tentacles. Here is where I'm going to advertise the fungal parts again, because the fungal parts are one of the best in HeroForge. So you can see me using like fungal facial features kind of combined with the zombie features, I would say. And then because I couldn't get rid of the neck, I just decided to kind of combine it with some fungal clothing and like beards and like hair to make like the transition a little bit more nicer. And as soon as I like started working on Nurgle, I knew I kind of wanted to give him that like smile, because I'm not really like a Warhammer fan of the lore or anything like that. My experience with Warhammer lore is essentially just playing Mordheim, City of the Damned, and that's honestly about it. But my understanding of Nurgle is that it's supposed to be like a sort of a god that is about enabling behaviors which kind of leave you stagnating and just it's just like a god that is about embracing the stagnation and like depression and just be in your own filth and stay there, you know? So I knew I wanted to have like a kind of a grotesque smile. Here I started working on the guy. Look at him, he's having like such a swell time already, you know, and we haven't even started. And you can see me here that I'm using a lot of fungal features again. And the thing is, like, at some point I just decided to get rid of a lot of them, and I also get rid of a lot of these like crystals and stuff, just because, well, I don't think like Nurgle necessarily has anything about mushrooms. That's kind of like the vibe that I'm getting. And I don't think the mushrooms necessarily have anything against Nurgle either. You don't ever see Nurgle depicted with mushrooms, you know, or like their armies depicted with mushrooms, as far as I know. That's kind of like my understanding. So I didn't feel like mushrooms was really a theme for the Nurgle, you know, and then the crystals, I kind of decided to get away from the crystals as well. Here I put in the first parts. I was just kind of exploring the horns. We increase his body size. Hey, and hey, we have like Nurgle celebrating. Yeah, on the rocks. On the rocks. With a big bum in the back. Here I made the tummy a little bit bigger. I wanted it to be as big as possible, but kind of like an issue is like I had to like make his spine go like this, you know? So because I made his spine go like this, he looks in the back like this, you know, and that's kind of not ideal effect that I wanted to achieve. What I had to do was I had to like cover up this area so that you don't see his arching back. And when I made him like sit down on the rocks, I also thought he was missing something. I decided to give him a cauldron, you know, from which he can like cook up his plagues. Here we got like the first colors, and also this is where I started brewing the idea that because of the way he was sitting, he kind of just like the cauldron was positioned in like such a nice way for the Nurgle that I felt like maybe it could be a cool idea to open up his stomach and make like his guts spill out into the cauldron. Here I was playing a little bit with the colors. You can see me putting in some word zone in the back, but again, I don't like it. And yeah, like pretty much this guy's color scheme is kind of like gray, dark greenish, like swamp green, swamp yellows, like sickly yellows, sickly oranges. That kind of a thing. This is where I started covering up his backside with the rocks because I had like this sort of an issue with an arching back here. I decided to put like some cloth thingies like these, and this one here, it's like a cape. It's a cape, and you can see here the arch that it is supposed to cover up. So I kind of interpreted this sort of an item as maybe it's like some guts or like skin, something like that, you know. And because I needed to cover up what it looks like on the back, I just decided to put like a rock there, you know. And I was trying out the same thing like here, but it just wasn't working as I hoped it would. here is where I kind of like changed my mind and I came back to the fungal thingies. And I also had an idea to maybe just put some tails on his back and then like maybe make those tails go down his arm to make like the arm a little bit thicker. But then I just like go away from that idea. You can see me messing around with this sort of stuff, but I get rid of this. I was thinking maybe there could be something leaking out of his eyes, but you know, I kind of like go away from that. I was thinking like, you know, maybe as he's like cooking up his like plague, you know, he's like doing some magical greeting or something like that. Or maybe it's like casting a spell. Here I started playing more with the colors, you know, so I kind of went more into the like a grotesque pink that is like on top of like a disgusting green and stuff. More messing with the stomach. And then I also felt like the transition between like the stomach and his guts like spilling out into the cauldron. It wasn't as cool. And I also saw like some followers, some Nurgle followers being depicted with like a maw inside a stomach, you know, that opens up and so on. So maybe like maybe Nurgle himself has a maw that opens up from the stomach so that his guts can spill into a cauldron. You can see me here working more on the idea. So essentially I have like 2 rows of teeth, you know, which are able to produce this sort of an effect. And then on top of it, I have like some extra fungal stuff, you know. And I also, as you can see, I also rotated the cauldron a little bit because I got the idea that maybe the cauldron is like overflowing with his innards, you know. So not only is it like flowing inside the cauldron, it is also like spilling out into the cauldron. Then I also like put some of his guts on his hand. You know, they kind of like magically cling to his hand. I just kind of feel like, you know, like once in a while, like Nurgle just whooshes around with his hand inside of it. Maybe he like tastes it, you know, who knows. The guts are spilling out, you know. I added a bunch of decals, but this is also like another reason why I decided to rework this Nurgle, because I do use like a bunch of decals which cover a lot of the original color, but I felt like it made the design a little bit more incoherent, you know. I added some spikes, you know, to Nurgle here. And this is also another reason why I kind of decided to rework him a little bit. Like the way I position these spikes, I kind of feel like they were positioned a little bit too regularly for a Nurgle. And I felt like Nurgle is more of a god that is not very regular, but he's more of a like a irregular god, you know? It's just like when suddenly like a spike grows somewhere, you know, that's normal. There's not really like a pattern to things. I feel when I think like about patterns and stuff, I think that would be more leaning to Slanesh or like Tsinj, I think. Probably Slanesh. Probably Slanesh. Because it's like perfectionism, right? And I also added like some spikes to the back. Again, I kind of didn't like them. Oh, a pretty fun thing. I added some fungal beards under the armpits, you know, for just some more fun. I also added like these mushrooms here, again, into the environment. But again, I kind of get rid of the mushrooms because I didn't feel like mushrooms were quite the theme of Nurgle. And there are like spikes here and here, and we also have like spikes here and here from the like very regular pattern where these spikes show up. And also I added a little small Nurgle symbol This thing right here, it costs, I believe, like a lot. So I'm currently at 104%. If I delete this, we're at 92%. And that was the Nurgle which I did around like Christmas, you know? I finished him around Christmas and I was like, damn, this is a pretty good mini. Like I think I'm good to go, you know? With this one. So when I was planning to release Nurgle on this week, I was suddenly like, oh, is this really Nurgle? I mean, it looks Nurgly, right? But then, like, why does he have like these weird spider eyes here, which are not meant to look like spider eyes, but they are still kind of like spider eyes? Why does he have like these like weird horns? Why does he have like thorns, you know, on his horns? Maybe they're supposed to look like not thorns, but they still kind of do look like thorns. So why does he have that? And then why does he have a word stone in his brain? You know, and I started like asking more and more of these questions, and I just decided to rework him, you know, at the last moment. So first thing that I did was get rid of the decals, you know, that were covering large part of the model, just so that I can like take a proper look at like how things were colored and how I wanted them to be colored. Then I returned to the guy's face, and I thought, well, Nurgle is often like depicted with a very long tongue. You know, I guess like demons in Warhammer in general are depicted with a long tongue. So I was thinking of like adding like a long tongue coming from his mouth, and I just decided to add a lot more irregularities to his face. I felt like it was appropriate for a Nurgle. What other creature has like an irregular face, if not Nurgle? I think it should be Nurgle. Here experimenting with the tongue, but I didn't like how it looked, so I got rid of it. And because the tongue idea wasn't really working out, I just added the bottom teeth again, and you can see the tongue is kind of like hidden. Right here, I mess around with it later. So he still has a tongue, it's just like behind his teeth. And I gave him a beautiful, beautiful smile. I figured that maybe a better thing for me to do with Nurgle was just to have like dark lighting here, so that we don't have to worry as much about the details on the back and just mostly focus on the front, you know. And another thing that I changed from the original model was just the guts spilling out of his stomach. I just kind of made it so that it goes like more wide, you know, and it's not this sort of a narrow thing. It's just, I wanted it to look like there's something just like somebody's throwing up at you. And of course, he has the smile because he's excited about that. More messing with the lighting. I was looking at what sort of horns I wanted to do for Nurgle as a replacement, because I wanted to change them up as well. And Nurgle, as I said, is often depicted with like antlers and stuff, so kind of wanted to do that, but then I also felt like it looked a little bit druidic in a way rather than like demony. I was trying reindeer antlers here, wasn't quite satisfied. And then I kind of decided to stick around with like these two horns, one larger one, and the other one like smaller for more deformities on his bodies. And I figured that maybe if maybe the this side of the face is droopy because it is being pushed on by the horn. I decided to add the symbol of Nurgle here again on the cauldron. I think this one is prettier than what I had before, and it's also much simpler, and this one costs only 6% of kit bashing. One thing that I changed were also his eyes, you know? I decided to give him like, you can see here L star, you know, and this is a star as well. This is a star. So I changed his eyes to the star eyes. And in this case, I don't think you really can see the stars, you know? And if anything, it looks like he just has like something in his eyes rather than like starlight. Then because I felt like the demons in Warhammer, the Nurgle demons in Warhammer have quite irregular horns, so I added more horns on the horns to make bigger horns and more chaotic horns. Here he looks a little bit froggy, if anything. And that brings us finally to this version of Nurgle. For the background, I decided to go with a sort of a swampy area, but I'm not really sure if Nurgle would have in his areas trees whatsoever. I would assume no. I would assume most of the trees would be dead, you know, or like non-existence, like rotten away. But yeah. So here we have Nurgle. He's having a swell time in his Nurgle plague zone, and his guts are getting spilled out into the world as he is brewing a new plague. He is loving it. So yeah, that's Nurgle for ya. Let me know what you think. I don't think I'm gonna be reworking this model anymore. I don't want to spend any more time on this whatsoever. I just want to let go of this model and just move on with my life. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Take care and bye bye. I'm out. Whoosh.